Edward Jenner, the cowpox cowboy. What if I told you it was the deadliest killer of humanity? Well, at least it was. Smallpox, butcher of 500 million lives, was defeated not by a fancy lab, but a country doc with a fetish for cow udder. Meet Edward Jenner, the original biohacker who weaponized folk wisdom against the establishment. This is the wild, bloody, and utterly bizarre story of the first vaccine where milkmaids were the MVPs and pus was the potion. The plague years. Smallpox grip. So first things first, what exactly is smallpox? Well, it is a type of viral virus that attacks the epithelial cells around your face and your upper respiratory tract. And this virus is incredibly good at spreading via droplets when an infected person coughs or sneezes. Imagine COVID times, but with much higher mortality rates. In the 18th century, smallpox killed 30% of its victims. Survivors often ended up scarred or blinded. And no, this isn't like chickenpox. This is way worse. Jenner's time saw two main ways to combat the scourge. The first one was called inoculation or variolation. Yeah, so basically, you snort some scabs from an infected person and hope for the best. It did lower the death rate to about 2%. But here's the problem. You may end up spreading the disease. Like the British aristocrat Lady Montagu, she went to Turkey, stole their version of inoculation, brought it back to London, and secretly inoculated her own kids who survived. So then, the rich started doing it too. But it was risky. And now enter our hero, Edward Jenner, future father of medicine, who apprenticed himself at the age of 14 to a surgeon. Now he learned all sorts of useful things about human anatomy, like how to cure a gunshot wound or pull out a bullet. But this surgeon also dabbled in some folk cures, and Jenner heard the milkmaids boast, "I can't get smallpox. I've had cowpox." And he was like, "What the fuck does that even mean?" So when he heard that a farmer's wife was down with smallpox, he asked for samples of the pus from her sores, put it on a slide, and looked through it under a microscope. And voila! There were these distinct-looking rods, which today we know as cowpox virus. Then in 1749, at the ripe age of 18, Jenner got forced into variolation, because it was basically law that everyone had to do it. And he suffered 4 weeks with high fever and excruciating pain. But once he recovered, he began scouring the countryside for someone who'd had cowpox. Finally, he found her. Bessie the cow. He scraped some cowpox sore from her udder, mixed it with a bit of water, and injected it into the arm of an unsuspecting milkmaid. Then he waited. 2 weeks passed. She developed symptoms, but they were much milder than smallpox. She recovered and developed immunity. And Jenner's origin story was complete. The great experiment. Human guinea pigs. Okay, so Jenner had his theory about cowpox protection, but how could he prove it? Well, like any wannabe scientist, he recruited human test subjects. Subject number 1 was poor old farmer Benjamin Jesty. Now, Jenner had watched how the cowpox outbreak had bypassed Jesty and his family. So in 1774, he scraped some of that cowpox from Bessie the cow, injected it into the farmer's wife, and then her kids. Then he sat back with a bag of popcorn, waiting for the results. They were like, "No, I don't think that we want your goddamn injection." But whatever. When the outbreak hit town, the Jesty family remained immune. Their neighbors, not so much. They lost a child, but the family was protected. However, those ungrateful villagers thought that the Jestys were burning their crops, accused them of witchcraft, threatened to burn their house down, and called it the devil's work. So much for human trials. But Jenner wasn't done. So he found another volunteer, a milkmaid named Sarah Nelms, who had fresh cowpox blisters. He scraped off the pus, mixed it with some water, injected it into an 8-year-old little boy named James Phipps. Up till day 7 came with fever, chills, and swollen lymph nodes in the armpit. And to say that James' mom was not happy would be an understatement. She nearly stabbed Jenner in the throat. But eventually the fever broke, and by day 9, young James recovered. Now, Jenner proudly proclaimed him immune, but he wasn't done yet. Months later, he took some actual smallpox, injected it into James, and bada bing. Bada boom. No lesions, no fever. Immunity proven! However, people didn't really take kindly to this whole vaccination thing. Jenner faced backlash, the anti-vaxxers of 1800. Now, Jenner published his results and invited other doctors to replicate his experiment, but they called him a quack. The clergy said the vaccination defied God's punishment for sin. And some doctors even claimed that he was trying to make people grow cow horns and hooves. There was even a pamphlet circulating showing the people who had been vaccinated and sprouted hooves. And let's be real, that's what all the cool kids were doing back in the 1800s. But Jenner was unfazed. He sent samples of his vaccine to Napoleon, who actually put several British medics in jail for daring to vaccinate his soldiers. But eventually, after realizing that they were actually immune, he set them free and said, "Science has no borders." That must have been pretty epic. Finally, in 1802, Parliament paid Jenner £10,000. That's about $1.6 million today. Not bad for a day's work. But they also banned the free distribution of his vaccine. You know that kind of stuff? Corruption? So Jenner retired to his estate, leaving behind a legacy that would change the world. The shot that changed the world. In 1840, the UK banned variolation and mandated vaccines. And finally, in 1980, the World Health Organization declared smallpox eradicated. But vaccination rates are dropping across the globe. We've got anti-vaxxers to thank for that. And none of it would have happened if not for the courage of one man, one cow, and one unflinching set of balls. But here's the kicker. Blossom the cow. The very cow whose udder provided the world with its first vaccine. Well, they stuffed her hide. And it still hangs at St. George's Medical School in London. How meta is that? So why aren't we all running around with cow udders on our arms? Well, maybe it's because Jenner believed that everyone should have free access to vaccines. And that's why he partnered up with a pharmaceutical company called Big Pharma to produce and distribute his vaccine. Now, joke's on us because Jenner sold his invention for 1 British penny. But today, Big Pharma raking in billions from vaccines. Yep, you heard that right. Vaccines are one of the most profitable industries in the world. And according to a recent report, Big Pharma has made over $167 billion from selling vaccines for infectious diseases. Small wonder why they don't want to make vaccines free for everyone. After all, it's not in their best interest to reduce profits. Sure, they might be saving lives, but that doesn't put money in their pockets. It's a tough balance between doing good and making millions. And unfortunately, it seems like the latter is winning. But hey, at least we've got Blossom the cow, right? Thanks for watching this episode, Rebels of Reason. If you liked it, please stay tuned for more updates. And remember, 1 man plus 1 cow plus unflinching balls equals 500 million lives. See you next time.